It was a cool spring evening in Minnesota, May 13th, 2008. The kind of night where the air smells faintly of damp soil and the last chill of winter lingers in the breeze. Brandon Swanson, a 19-year-old college student, was wrapping up his semester at Minnesota West Community and Technical College in Canby. He'd just completed a year studying wind turbines, a technical, hands-on field that fit his inquisitive mind and steady nature. Brandon wasn't the kind to cause trouble. He was bright, responsible, and quietly ambitious. That night, like so many other young people in small-town America, he decided to celebrate the end of the semester with some friends. There were no big parties or wild plans, just a few stops at a couple of gatherings in the area, nothing out of the ordinary. He left his friends late into the evening, driving his Chevy Lumina alone, heading back to his home in Marshall, a 30-mile trip he'd made countless times. At around 1:15 a.m., Brandon's car veered off the road near the small town of Taunton, Minnesota, and got stuck in a ditch. No one knows exactly how it happened. There were no signs of a crash or damage to the vehicle, just a car quietly stranded along a rural gravel road, surrounded by endless fields and a sky full of stars. Frustrated but uninjured, Brandon did what any 19-year-old might do. He reached for his phone and called his parents. At 1:54 a.m., Annette and Brian Swanson were woken by the ring. Their son's voice came through the line, calm but annoyed. He'd gotten stuck and needed a ride. Brandon believed he was near Lind, a small town just a few miles from Marshall. He asked his parents to come get him. Dutifully, Brian and Annette got in their car and drove out, talking to their son on and off throughout the journey to pinpoint his location. But something didn't feel right. When they arrived in Lind and searched the area Brandon described, there was no sign of him. No car, no lights, no movement. They turned down every road, scanning ditches and fields with their headlights. Still on the phone with Brandon, they grew more confused. He insisted he could see lights from a nearby town and was walking toward them. At one point, frustrated with the mix-up, he hung up. But minutes later, he called back. There were no angry words, just exasperation and confusion. The call continued for nearly 47 minutes. Brandon kept walking, describing his surroundings: gravel roads, fences, a stream he had to cross. The conversation was filled with attempts to make sense of the situation. He was sure he was close to Lind, but his parents still couldn't find him. Then, without warning, at 2:30 a.m., Brandon suddenly said, "Oh, shh," and the line went dead. Annette Swanson stared at her phone. The call had ended so abruptly, no goodbyes, no explanation, just Brandon's startled exclamation and then silence. She and Brian tried calling back, over and over. The phone rang, but Brandon never answered. The minutes stretched into an hour. Panic slowly took root, its icy grip tightening with each unanswered ring. At first light, they contacted the police, but the response they received was less than urgent. "He's 19, they were told. He has the right to be missing." It's a phrase countless families of missing adults know too well. An institutional shrug, built on the assumption that young adults wander off, take a break from their lives, and almost always come back. But Annette and Brian knew their son. He wouldn't just disappear, not without a word, not after a conversation that ended in what sounded like fear. Despite the initial reluctance of law enforcement, the Swansons insisted something was wrong. Hours later, the authorities finally began to search. They started with Brandon's cell phone records, which told a very different story from the one everyone had assumed. He hadn't been near Lind at all. His final calls pinged off a cell tower near the tiny town of Minnesota, about 25 miles from where his parents had been searching in Lind. His car was eventually found along a remote gravel road near Taunton, exactly where the GPS record suggested. He had been off by a considerable distance. It was a rural, open area, covered with farmland, drainage ditches, and a few scattered groves. To someone unfamiliar or disoriented in the dark, the terrain would have been confusing. But Brandon had seemed so sure of where he was. He'd even described seeing lights, perhaps from a nearby farm, thinking they were from the town. The realization was gutting. While the Swansons had been searching in one place, Brandon had been walking alone, somewhere else entirely. With the new information in hand, the search effort kicked into high gear. Dogs were brought in, and they quickly picked up Brandon's scent. It was a promising lead. The dogs followed the trail from the abandoned car, along a gravel road, and into an open field. The trail continued past an abandoned farm building, through another field, and then down to a stream. That stream would become a haunting centerpiece of the investigation. At the edge of the water, the scent stopped. On the other side, it picked up again, suggesting that Brandon had managed to cross it. Searchers were baffled. The water wasn't deep, especially in May. He could have waded across, maybe even slipped, but if he had drowned, where was his body? Cadaver dogs were deployed along the stream. Boats combed the waters. Search teams returned again and again, walking the fields, scanning the area from helicopters and planes, and even using infrared cameras to detect any possible signs of life or remains. But nothing was found. No clothes, no shoes, no wallet or phone, no remains, just silence. In the days and weeks that followed, the search for Brandon Swanson became one of the largest in Minnesota's history. Hundreds of volunteers, police officers, and dog teams scoured the area where his scent had last been detected. The stream, Lyon County's Yellow Medicine River, was searched again and again. Still, no trace. It was as if the night had swallowed Brandon whole. People began to speculate. Was it possible he had succumbed to hypothermia? The temperature had dipped to the low 40s that night. Not freezing, but cold enough to disorient someone soaked and lost. Maybe he had wandered further than anyone thought, disoriented in the dark and damp. But Brandon had been on the phone, talking lucidly for nearly 50 minutes. He had described landmarks, fences, gravel paths, and lights in the distance. He didn't sound panicked, just frustrated. And that final exclamation, "Oh, shh," suggested something sudden had startled him, something more than cold. Search teams began to consider darker possibilities. Could someone have picked him up? Could he have fallen into an old well, a culvert, a hidden sinkhole in the farmland? The more time passed, the stranger it all seemed. The Swanson family never gave up. Year after year, they returned to the same fields, the same gravel roads, retracing the steps of that haunting phone call. Brandon's father would walk for hours, imagining the world from his son's eyes, what he might have seen, where he might have turned. They advocated for better response protocols for missing adults. In 2009, largely due to their persistence, the Minnesota legislature passed Brandon's Law, which mandates that police must begin an immediate investigation and file a missing persons report for adults under suspicious circumstances, especially when foul play or danger is suspected, regardless of age. The law was a victory, but for the Swansons, it was bittersweet. Brandon's mother, Annette, once said in an interview, "It's almost harder now. The more time passes, the more it feels like we're no longer waiting for him to come home, but waiting to find what's left. Yet there's still no evidence of what happened that night. No one knows for sure why Brandon left the road instead of waiting by the car. No one knows what he saw in those last moments. No one knows what happened after the line went dead. In the absence of evidence, Theories rushed in to fill the void. Some believed Brandon may have fallen into the water, hit his head, and drowned. A tragic accident. But the stream wasn't deep, and extensive searches turned up no remains. Others proposed a more sinister outcome, that someone had encountered Brandon that night and harmed him. Perhaps a passerby on the rural road or someone living nearby. Yet again, no sign of struggle, no physical clues. There's a third, quieter theory, that Brandon became lost in the maze of Minnesota farmland, disoriented after the fall into the ditch and the trek through darkness. His phone was running out of battery, and the sudden end of the call might have come from a fall, a hidden culvert, an unmarked well, even just a treacherous step into tall grass, concealing something fatal. In this vast, open land, the possibilities were as endless as the horizon. But for all the theorizing, the one thing everyone agrees on is that Brandon didn't intend to disappear. He wanted to be found. That 47-minute call was the sound of someone trying to make it home. In the years that followed, the Swanson family has endured the kind of grief most cannot imagine. An open-ended ache with no place to land. No funeral, no answers. Just the hope that someday something will surface. A shoe, a bone, a phone. Something to fill in the blank space where a son's story stopped mid-sentence. They've turned their pain into purpose. Thanks to their advocacy, Brandon's Law now helps families across Minnesota get the immediate attention they need when an adult goes missing. That law, born from a ditch and a late-night call, has likely saved lives. But for the Swansons, the road hasn't ended. Every spring, as the anniversary of Brandon's disappearance comes around, people remember. They leave tributes. Some retrace the area, others write about the case. It's become a quiet kind of legacy, not a solved mystery, but a haunting reminder of how quickly the ordinary can turn unknowable. Even now, Brandon's face appears on missing persons websites, smiling, frozen at 19. Somewhere, out in that countryside, the land may still hold its secrets. The last thing he said, "Oh, shh," echoes like a final breadcrumb, a sound that broke through the night and left behind 1,000 questions. The investigation remains open. Brandon Swanson has never been found, and until he is, the fields of western Minnesota will always hold the weight of one quiet, unsolved night. Brandon Swanson's disappearance isn't just a story about a missing person. It's about how fragile the boundary is between the known and the unknown. One moment, a voice on the phone. The next, silence. Despite exhaustive searches, state legislation, national media coverage, and years of tireless advocacy from his family, Brandon remains missing. And yet, his absence continues to echo through every field combed by volunteers, every law shaped in his name, and every family who has since been spared a similar weight because someone finally took their fears seriously. What happened to Brandon that night may never be fully understood. Whether it was a tragic accident, a wrong step, or something darker, the landscape has kept its secret well. But the story lives on. In podcasts, in police training, in missing persons reform, in the quiet courage of his parents, who transformed their heartbreak into action, and in the hearts of strangers, who still remember a young man who just wanted to come home. Brandon's story reminds us of something simple and profound, how quickly ordinary life can unravel, and how powerful a single voice, heard in the dark, can become. As long as he is missing, Brandon Swanson's name will stand not only for what was lost, but for what must never be ignored again. There are countless mysteries out there, some waiting to be solved, others just waiting to be told. I'll be here following the clues.